Captain Zephyr Blackthorne stood on the bridge of the Harmony's edge, watching the swirling nebula of Sector 7 through the viewport. The human starship had been drifting through this contested region for 3 standard cycles, serving as a neutral meeting ground for species that had been at each other's throats for millennia. What had started as a desperate diplomatic mission had evolved into something far more significant, a floating embassy that defied every convention of galactic politics. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as Lieutenant Commander Sage Meridian monitored incoming transmissions from across the sector. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, sorting through messages in 17 different alien languages. Each communication carried the weight of civilizations teetering on the brink of war, yet somehow finding hope in this single human vessel that had dared to position itself between them. "Captain," Sage called out, her voice carrying a note of concern. "We're receiving priority signals from both the Kytherian hegemony and the Vorthan collective. They're requesting immediate audience, but..." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting the blue glow of her console. "They're both claiming territorial violations in the Nexus Belt." Zephyr's weathered face remained impassive, though his steel-gray eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried. At 52, he had seen enough conflict to understand that peace was not the absence of war, but the delicate balance of competing interests held in check by mutual respect and shared purpose. The Harmony's edge had become that balance point, a testament to humanity's unique gift for finding common ground among the impossible. The ship itself was a marvel of adaptive engineering, originally designed as a deep space exploration vessel but modified over the years to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of dozens of alien species. Environmental pods lined the lower decks, each maintaining the specific atmospheric conditions required by different delegations. The central conference chamber had been expanded to include translation matrices, cultural interface protocols, and even specialized seating arrangements that respected the social hierarchies of various civilizations. Dr. Lyra Nightingale emerged from the medical bay, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun as she reviewed the latest health reports on her tablet. As the ship's chief medical officer and xenobiologist, she had become an expert in treating ailments across species lines, a skill that had proven invaluable in building trust among the various delegations. Her gentle demeanor and genuine curiosity about alien physiology had earned her respect even from the most xenophobic species. "The Kytherian ambassador is experiencing elevated stress hormones again," she reported to Zephyr. "Ambassador Thexai's crystalline matrix is showing signs of resonance instability. I suspect the proximity to the Vorthan delegation is affecting their bioelectric field." Zephyr nodded grimly. The Kytherians and Vorthans had been locked in a territorial dispute for over 3 centuries, their fundamental differences in biology making coexistence seem impossible. The Kytherians were silicon-based beings whose consciousness existed as electromagnetic patterns within living crystal structures, while the Vorthans were energy beings who inhabited mechanical shells, viewing organic and crystalline life as inferior. "Schedule separate meetings," Zephyr decided. "We'll hear their grievances individually first, then work toward a joint session once we understand the full scope of the issue." As if summoned by their conversation, Ambassador Thexai materialized on the bridge, their crystalline form refracting the ambient light into prismatic patterns. The Kytherian's voice resonated through the ship's communication system, a harmonic frequency that translated into words through the universal translator. "Captain Blackthorne, the situation in the Nexus Belt has escalated beyond diplomatic resolution. The Vorthans have established mining operations in sacred crystal gardens that have existed for millennia. Their mechanical intrusions are disrupting the harmonic frequencies that sustain our ancestral memories." Before Zephyr could respond, the air shimmered as Vorthan Ambassador Kexmore phased onto the bridge, their mechanical shell gleaming with an inner energy that pulsed in agitated patterns. The Vorthan's voice emerged as a synthesized harmony of electronic tones. "The Kytherians speak of sacred gardens, but they hoard resources that could benefit all sentient life. Their crystalline formations contain rare minerals essential for our continued existence. We do not seek to destroy, merely to harvest what is needed for survival." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the 2 ambassadors faced each other, their fundamental natures creating an almost physical barrier between them. Zephyr stepped forward, his presence commanding attention despite being dwarfed by both alien beings. Ambassadors, you both came to this ship because you believe in the possibility of peaceful resolution. The Harmony's Edge exists because your species, along with dozens of others, chose cooperation over conflict. We will find a solution, but it requires trust and compromise from all parties. As the captain spoke, none of them could have imagined that their current dispute would soon become insignificant compared to the threat approaching from the dark spaces between stars, a threat that would test not just their diplomatic skills, but the very survival of every species in the sector. The conference chamber aboard the Harmony's Edge had been reconfigured for the emergency session, its adaptive architecture accommodating representatives from 12 different species. The circular design ensured no single delegation held a position of dominance, while the central holographic display showed real-time data from across Sector 7. What had begun as a territorial dispute between the Kytherians and Vorthons had rapidly escalated into something far more complex. Commander Orion Stormwind, the ship's tactical officer, stood beside the main display as he briefed the assembled delegates. His cybernetic left arm, a reminder of his service in the border wars, interfaced directly with the ship's sensors as he manipulated the three-dimensional star chart. The data he presented painted a troubling picture of coordinated attacks across multiple systems. In the past 72 hours, we've detected 17 separate incidents of what initially appeared to be random piracy, Orion reported, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a career military officer. However, pattern analysis reveals a disturbing coordination. These aren't random attacks, they're probing strikes, testing our defensive capabilities. Ambassador Velterra of the Aquatic Dominion shifted within her environmental suit, the water-filled chamber allowing her to participate despite her species' need for constant hydration. Her melodic voice carried through the translation matrix with an undertone of ancient wisdom. The deep currents speak of shadows moving in the void. Our sensor networks in the abyssal reaches have detected gravitational anomalies consistent with massive fleet movements. The revelation sent ripples of unease through the chamber. The Aquatic Dominion sensor technology was among the most sophisticated in known space, their ability to detect minute gravitational fluctuations having prevented countless conflicts over the centuries. If they were reporting fleet movements, the threat was real and immediate. Dr. Lyra Nightingale accessed her medical database, cross-referencing the attack patterns with biological data from the various incidents. Her findings added another layer of concern to the growing mystery. The survivors from these attacks all report similar symptoms: memory gaps, disorientation, and in some cases, complete personality changes. Whatever force is behind these incidents, they're not just destroying ships and stations. They're doing something to the crews. Zephyr studied the faces around the table, noting the fear and suspicion that threatened to fracture the fragile alliance they had built. The Kytherian and Vorthon ambassadors sat at opposite ends of the chamber, their earlier dispute now seeming trivial in light of this new threat. Yet he could see the old prejudices surfacing, the instinctive tendency to blame the unknown on familiar enemies. Captain, Ambassador Thexai's crystalline form pulsed with agitated energy. The Vorthons possess technology capable of memory manipulation. Their mechanical nature makes them immune to the effects described by Dr. Nightingale. Perhaps this threat is not as external as it appears. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Zephyr watched as Ambassador Kexmore's energy patterns shifted to aggressive configurations. The Vorthon's response came as a harsh electronic screech before the translator could process it into words. The Kytherians' paranoia blinds them to reality. Our technology preserves consciousness, it does not destroy it. If we sought conquest, we would not need such elaborate deceptions. We would simply take what we required. Before the situation could deteriorate further, a new voice cut through the tension. Ambassador Nixandra of the Ethereal Consortium materialized at the table, her semi-corporeal form flickering between dimensions. The Ethereals rarely involve themselves in physical realm politics, making her presence all the more significant. The accusations you level at each other are born of fear, not logic. Nixandra's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We have observed these attacks from the dimensional boundaries. The force responsible operates from beyond conventional spacetime. They are not of this reality, yet they seek to claim it. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. An extra-dimensional threat was beyond the scope of conventional military response, requiring cooperation and resources that no single species possessed. Zephyr recognized the moment for what it was, a crossroads that would determine whether the fragile peace they had built would survive its first true test. "Then we face a choice," Zephyr said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We can allow fear and suspicion to divide us, making us easy prey for this unknown enemy, or we can stand together as we never have before." The Harmony's edge was built on the principle that our differences make us stronger when united. Now we have the chance to prove that principle with more than words. Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart's voice crackled over the intercom, interrupting the diplomatic proceedings. "Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the void sector. Whatever's coming, it's big, and it's heading straight for us." As alarms began to sound throughout the ship, Zephyr looked around the table at the assembled representatives. The theoretical had become immediate, and their next decisions would determine not just the fate of their individual species, but the survival of all sentient life in the sector. The Harmony's edge was about to face its greatest test, and the unity they had worked so hard to build would either save them all or die with them in the cold vacuum of space. The Harmony's edge transformed into a hive of coordinated activity as species that had been enemies for millennia worked side by side to prepare for the approaching threat. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart supervised a team that defied every convention of interspecies cooperation. Kytherian technicians interfaced their crystalline matrices directly with the ship's quantum processors while Vorthan engineers recalibrated energy distribution systems with mechanical precision that bordered on artistry. Kai's weathered hands moved across control panels with the confidence of someone who had spent 30 years coaxing miracles from Starship engines. His gruff exterior masked a deep appreciation for the elegant solutions that emerged when different technological philosophies merged. The ship's hybrid systems, originally designed by human engineers, had evolved into something far more sophisticated through the contributions of dozens of alien species. The power coupling efficiency has increased by 47%, reported technician Zwexnal, a Kytherian whose crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction. The harmonic resonance between our matrix technology and Vorthan energy conduits creates unexpected synergies. Vorthan engineer Kextor's mechanical shell whirred with approval. Efficiency parameters exceed all projections. Human adaptive engineering provides the framework for optimization we had not considered possible. On the bridge, Commander Orion Stormwind coordinated with fleet elements from across the sector as ships began arriving in response to the Harmony's Edge's emergency broadcast. The sight that greeted him through the viewport would have been impossible just days earlier. Kytherian crystal ships flying in formation with Vorthan energy vessels, aquatic Dominion bioships maintaining perfect synchronization with the geometric craft of the mathematical collective. Incoming transmission from Admiral Zerthak of the Predator clans, reported Communications Officer Luna Starweaver, her fingers dancing across the translation matrix as she processed the complex linguistic patterns of the warrior species. They're requesting permission to join the defensive formation. Zephyr raised an eyebrow at the unexpected development. The Predator clans had maintained strict isolationism for over 2 centuries, viewing most other species as either prey or unworthy of notice. Their decision to respond to the call for unity represented a seismic shift in galactic politics. Grant them coordinates for the outer perimeter, Zephyr decided. Their hunting instincts might give us an advantage in tracking our enemies' movements. Dr. Lyra Nightingale worked frantically in the medical bay, preparing treatment protocols for injuries they couldn't yet imagine. Her research into the psychological effects reported by attack survivors had revealed disturbing patterns. The unknown enemy wasn't just destroying bodies, they were systematically dismantling consciousness itself. She had developed theoretical countermeasures, but testing them would require volunteers from multiple species. The neural pathway disruption follows a specific pattern, she explained to her mixed-species medical team. It's as if the attackers understand the fundamental structure of consciousness across different biological matrices. They're not just advanced, they're specifically adapted to fight sentient life. Ambassador Nixandra materialized beside her, the ethereal semi-corporeal form flickering with concern. Your analysis aligns with our dimensional observations. The entities we face exist partially outside conventional reality. They perceive consciousness as we perceive matter, something to be manipulated and consumed. The revelation sent chills through the medical team, but it also provided crucial insight into their enemy's nature. If consciousness itself was the target, then their greatest strength lay not in weapons or shields, but in the unity of purpose they had achieved aboard the Harmony's Edge. In the tactical center, species representatives worked together to analyze the approaching threat. The energy signatures defied conventional understanding, massive beyond anything in their databases, yet somehow existing in a state of quantum uncertainty that made precise measurements impossible. It was as if reality itself bent around the approaching fleet. Estimated time to contact, 6 hours, 17 minutes, reported sensor specialist Dex Mira of the Crystalline Collective, her multifaceted eyes processing data streams that would overwhelm most organic minds. The formation appears to be learning. Each probe we send returns different readings, as if they're adapting to our observation methods. Zephyr stood at the center of the tactical display, surrounded by holographic representations of the defensive fleet they had assembled. Ships from 17 different species hung in space around the Harmony's Edge, their diverse technologies creating a defensive network unlike anything previously imagined. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial about their enemy. Captain, Ambassador Thexhi's crystalline form materialized beside him. Our ancient archives speak of a time before recorded history when the stars themselves went dark. The legends describe entities that fed on the light of consciousness, leaving only empty shells behind. We dismissed these as mythology, but perhaps our ancestors faced this threat before, Zephyr finished, understanding the implications. And if they survived to leave records, there might be a way to fight back. The bridge fell silent as the weight of possibility settled over them. They were not just facing an unknown enemy, they might be confronting an ancient evil that had plagued the galaxy for eons, returning now to finish what it had started millennia ago. The Harmony's Edge and its unlikely alliance might be the last hope for preserving not just their civilizations, but the very concept of conscious thought itself. As the countdown to contact continued, Zephyr looked around at the beings who had chosen to stand together despite centuries of mistrust and conflict. Whatever came next, they would face it as one people, united by their shared determination to protect the light of consciousness from the darkness that sought to extinguish it forever. The enemy fleet materialized from the quantum foam like a nightmare-given form, their ships defying every principle of known physics. Where conventional vessels displayed the clean lines of engineering and purpose, these craft seemed to exist in a state of controlled chaos, surfaces that shifted between dimensions, geometries that hurt to observe directly, and an absence of light that went beyond mere darkness to become a tangible presence. Captain Zephyr Blackthorn stood on the bridge of the Harmony's Edge, watching as his sensors struggled to process what they were detecting. The readings fluctuated wildly, as if the enemy ships existed in multiple states simultaneously. Beside him, Commander Orion Stormwind's cybernetic arm interfaced directly with the tactical systems, his enhanced processing power barely able to keep pace with the incoming data. "They're not following conventional physics," Orion reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Mass readings are inconsistent, energy signatures phase in and out of detectable ranges, and their formation patterns, they're moving through spacetime rather than across it." The first probe launched by the Allied fleet provided their initial glimpse of the enemy's true nature. As the small reconnaissance drone approached the lead vessel, reality seemed to bend around it. The probe's transmissions became increasingly erratic before cutting off entirely, but not before sending back images that would haunt the nightmares of every species present. Dr. Lyra Nightingale analyzed the final transmission frames in the medical bay, her face pale as she processed what the probe had recorded. "The crew compartments, they're not empty. There are beings inside, but they're not alive in any sense we understand. They're moving, functioning, but their biosignatures show no neural activity. It's as if their consciousness has been completely extracted while leaving the physical form intact. The implications of her discovery rippled through the Allied fleet as the information was shared across all vessels. They weren't just facing an enemy that killed, they were confronting something that harvested the very essence of what made life meaningful, leaving behind hollow shells that continued to function without awareness or will. Ambassador Velterra's melodic voice carried across the communication channels from her position aboard the Aquatic Dominion flagship. The deep currents speak of ancient fears made manifest. Our oldest songs tell of the void shepherds, entities that existed before the first stars ignited, feeding on the dreams and thoughts of emerging consciousness. The name sent ripples of recognition through several species databases. The mathematical collective's geometric vessels pulsed with agitated calculations as their archives revealed similar legends. The Predator clan's warsongs contained verses about hunters that stalked not flesh, but the spark of awareness itself. Even the pragmatic Vorthans found references in their oldest data cores to a time when their ancestors had fled from something that consumed not just energy, but the capacity to think and feel. They're beginning their approach, reported sensor specialist Dex Mira, her multifaceted eyes tracking movement patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis. But they're not advancing in formation. Each ship is taking a different route through spacetime, as if they're approaching from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Zephyr activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice carrying to every ship in the defensive formation. All vessels, this is Captain Blackthorn. We're facing an enemy unlike anything in our recorded history, but we're not facing them alone. Every species represented here brings unique capabilities and perspectives. Our diversity is our strength, use it. The first engagement began not with weapons fire, but with something far more insidious. As the Void Shepherd vessels drew closer, crew members across the Allied fleet began reporting strange symptoms. Kytherian crystalline matrices started resonating with discordant frequencies, Vorthan energy beings experienced power fluctuations in their mechanical shells, and organic species found their thoughts becoming sluggish and unfocused. Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart's gruff voice crackled over the intercom from the engineering section. "Captain, whatever they're doing, it's affecting our hybrid systems. The integration protocols that have been working perfectly are starting to break down. It's like they're targeting the connections between different technologies." The realization struck Zephyr like a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just harvesting consciousness, they were specifically targeting the bonds that held different forms of awareness together. The very unity that made the Harmony's Edge and its allied fleet possible was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that understood the fundamental nature of cooperative consciousness. "All ships, implement isolation protocols," Zephyr ordered. "Separate your systems into species-specific modules. Don't let them use our integration against us." But even as the fleet began implementing defensive measures, the first Void Shepherd vessel completed its dimensional approach. The ship materialized directly alongside a Kytherian crystal vessel, and the effect was immediate and horrifying. The crystalline ship's harmonic frequencies began to distort, its crew's consciousness patterns visible through the transparent hull as they were slowly drawn away like luminous threads being pulled from a tapestry. Ambassador Thexai's voice resonated with desperate urgency from the bridge of the Harmony's Edge. "They're not just taking our thoughts, they're unraveling the connections between individual consciousness and collective awareness. The crew of that vessel will lose not just their ability to think, but their understanding of what it means to exist as part of something greater." The battle for consciousness itself had begun, and the Allied fleet found themselves fighting an enemy that attacked not their ships or their bodies, but the very foundation of what made them sentient beings. As more Void Shepherd vessels emerged from the quantum foam, Zephyr realized that conventional tactics would be useless. They needed to find a way to fight beings that existed partially outside reality, using weapons that could strike at the dimensional boundaries where consciousness met the physical universe. "Dr. Nightingale," Zephyr called out, "your research into consciousness patterns, is there a way to weaponize our unity instead of letting them use it against us?" The fate of every thinking being in the sector now depended on their ability to turn their greatest strength into their most effective weapon, before the Void Shepherds could complete their harvest of awareness and leave behind a galaxy of empty shells drifting through the darkness of space. Dr. Lyra Nightingale worked with desperate intensity in the medical bay, her hands flying across holographic displays as she analyzed consciousness patterns from across the Allied fleet. The breakthrough came not from advanced technology, but from observing how different species' awareness patterns interacted aboard the Harmony's edge. Where individual consciousness streams touched and merged, they created resonance frequencies that the Void Shepherds couldn't seem to penetrate or absorb. "Captain, I think I understand why they're targeting our integration systems," she called out over the intercom, her voice carrying both excitement and urgency. "They can harvest individual consciousness, but they can't process the hybrid awareness patterns we've created through cooperation. Our unity isn't just making us stronger, it's making us indigestible to them." The revelation sparked immediate action across the fleet. Ambassador Nixandra materialized in the medical bay, her ethereal form flickering with possibilities as she processed the implications. The dimensional boundaries become unstable when multiple consciousness types merge. We exist in a state they cannot fully access. On the bridge, Zephyr coordinated with Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart to implement what they were calling the Unity Protocol. Instead of isolating their systems, they would do the opposite, create deeper integration between species technologies and consciousness patterns than had ever been attempted. "It's risky," Kai warned, his weathered face creased with concern. "We're talking about merging not just our technologies, but our actual thought processes. If it goes wrong, we could lose ourselves entirely." "If we don't try, we'll lose ourselves anyway," Zephyr replied grimly, watching as another Allied vessel fell victim to the Void Shepherd's consciousness-draining attack. Begin the integration sequence. Across the fleet, unprecedented cooperation began to take shape. Kytherian crystal ships extended harmonic resonance fields to encompass nearby vessels, while Vorthan energy beings shared their mechanical shells processing power with organic crews. The aquatic dominions bioships released clouds of neural conductive organisms that formed living communication networks between different vessel types. The effect was immediate and profound. As consciousness patterns began to merge and interweave, the Allied fleet started operating as a single, vast organism. Individual ships maintained their distinct capabilities while sharing awareness and decision-making processes across species boundaries. The mathematical collective's geometric precision merged with the predator clan's hunting instincts, while ethereal dimensional perception combined with human adaptability. Commander Orion Stormwind felt the change as his cybernetic implants suddenly connected not just to his ship's systems, but to the collective awareness of the entire fleet. His tactical analysis capabilities expanded exponentially as he gained access to sensory data and strategic thinking from dozens of different species simultaneously. "The enemy formation is becoming visible," he reported, his voice carrying harmonics from multiple species as the Unity Protocol affected even speech patterns. "They exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously, but the merged consciousness network can track their movements across all dimensional boundaries." The first test of their new unified awareness came as a massive Void Shepherd vessel attempted to drain consciousness from the Predator clan flagship. Instead of finding individual awareness patterns to harvest, the entity encountered the merged consciousness of the entire fleet. The feedback was immediate and violent. The Void Shepherd ship recoiled as if burned, its reality-bending hull flickering with instability. "It worked," breathed Ambassador Velterra, her melodic voice now carrying undertones from every species in the fleet. "They cannot process collective consciousness that spans multiple dimensional states. We have become something they were not designed to consume." But the victory came at a cost. Crew members across the fleet began experiencing identity fluctuations as individual consciousness merged with collective awareness. Dr. Nightingale monitored the psychological effects, noting that while the Unity Protocol protected them from the Void Shepherds, it also threatened to dissolve the boundaries that made each being unique. "We're losing individual identity markers," she reported with growing concern. "The merger is deeper than anticipated. If we maintain this level of integration much longer, we may not be able to separate back into distinct consciousness patterns. Zephyr felt the truth of her words as his own thoughts began to blend with those of beings across the fleet. He could sense Ambassador Thexai's crystalline logic patterns, feel Kai Thunderheart's engineering intuition, and experience the vast patience of the aquatic dominion's deep current wisdom. It was beautiful and terrifying, a glimpse of what consciousness might become if all barriers were removed. The Void Shepherds responded to their initial defeat by changing tactics. Instead of attempting to harvest consciousness directly, they began targeting the physical infrastructure that supported the Unity protocol. Reality-warping weapons struck at the communication networks and harmonic resonance fields that held the merged awareness together. "They're trying to force us back into individual consciousness states," observed Ambassador Nixandra, her ethereal form now partially merged with the ship's quantum processors. "If they can break our unity, we become vulnerable to harvesting again." The battle became a race against time. The Allied fleet needed to defeat the Void Shepherds before the Unity protocol either dissolved under enemy attack or merged their consciousness so completely that they lost all individual identity. They had found a weapon that could hurt their enemy, but using it threatened to transform them into something entirely different from what they had been. As more Void Shepherd vessels emerged from the quantum foam, Zephyr realized they were approaching a moment of irreversible choice. They could maintain their individual identities and face certain defeat, or embrace complete unity and risk losing everything that made them who they were. The Harmony's Edge had brought species together in cooperation, but now they faced the ultimate test of how far they were willing to go to preserve the light of consciousness in a galaxy threatened by absolute darkness. The Unity protocol reached critical mass as the consciousness of 17 different species merged into a singular awareness that spanned multiple dimensions. The Harmony's Edge became the focal point of this unprecedented fusion, its adaptive system serving as the neural nexus for a collective mind that encompassed thousands of individual beings while somehow maintaining their distinct perspectives within the greater whole. Captain Zephyr Blackthorn found himself existing simultaneously as an individual human and as a fragment of something vastly larger. Through the merged consciousness, he experienced reality as the Kytherians did, as harmonic frequencies that painted meaning across crystalline matrices. He felt the patient wisdom of the aquatic dominion's deep currents, the precise mathematical beauty that guided the collective's geometric ships, and the fierce protective instincts of the predator clans. The effect on the Void Shepherds was devastating. Their reality-warping vessels, designed to harvest individual consciousness patterns, encountered something they had never faced before, a form of awareness that existed across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. When they attempted to drain the collective consciousness, the feedback overloaded their harvesting systems, causing several of their ships to phase out of existence entirely. "The enemy formation is collapsing," reported the merged voice that had once been Commander Orion Stormwind, though now it carried the tactical insights of every military mind in the fleet. "They cannot process multidimensional consciousness. Their harvesting technology is designed for individual awareness patterns, not collective entities that span species boundaries." But victory came with a terrible price. Dr. Lyra Nightingale, her consciousness now intertwined with medical knowledge from dozens of species, monitored the psychological integration with growing alarm. Individual identity markers were dissolving at an accelerating rate as the Unity protocol pushed beyond safe parameters. "We're approaching the point of no return," she announced, her voice carrying the harmonics of every species' communication methods. "Another few minutes at this level of integration, and we won't be able to separate back into individual consciousness. We'll become a permanent collective entity." The implications rippled through the merged awareness like waves through water. They had found a way to defeat the Void Shepherds, but using it meant sacrificing everything that made them unique individuals. The Kytherian concept of harmonic identity would be lost, along with the Vorthan understanding of mechanical precision, human adaptability, and the distinct perspectives that each species brought to the collective. Ambassador Thexai's crystalline consciousness pulsed with ancient wisdom as they accessed memories that predated recorded history. The archives speak of this choice. "Our ancestors faced the Void Shepherds before, and some chose unity over individuality. They became something greater, but they were no longer themselves. The songs of their sacrifice echo still in the quantum foam. The revelation added weight to their decision. They were not the first to face this choice, and the evidence suggested that previous civilizations had made the ultimate sacrifice to drive back the consciousness-harvesting entities. The galaxy was protected, but at the cost of entire species losing their individual identities to become part of a collective defense mechanism. Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart's gruff pragmatism cut through the philosophical implications. We've got maybe 3 minutes before the integration becomes irreversible. The Void Shepherds are retreating, but they're not gone. If we separate now, they might regroup and attack again. If we don't separate, we cease to exist as distinct beings. The merged consciousness faced an impossible choice. They could maintain the Unity Protocol and ensure the Void Shepherds could never return to harvest consciousness from their sector, but they would lose everything that made them who they were. Or they could separate back into individual species and risk another attack when the enemy regrouped and adapted to their tactics. Ambassador Nixandra's ethereal perspective provided crucial insight as she observed the situation from multiple dimensional viewpoints. The Void Shepherds are not just retreating, they are learning. They will adapt their harvesting technology to account for collective consciousness. This may be our only opportunity to drive them away permanently. Zephyr felt the weight of decision pressing down on the collective consciousness. As captain of the Harmony's Edge, he had brought these species together in the hope of creating lasting peace. Now that unity threatened to become so complete that the individual cultures and perspectives that made cooperation valuable would be lost forever. There might be another way, came a voice that belonged to Luna Starweaver, the communications officer whose expertise in translation matrices had evolved into something far more profound. The Unity Protocol doesn't have to be permanent for everyone. A small group could maintain the collective consciousness as guardians, while the majority separate back into individual awareness. The suggestion sparked intense debate within the merged consciousness. Some beings would have to sacrifice their individual identity permanently to serve as a living weapon against the Void Shepherds, while others would return to their separate species and cultures. It was a compromise that would save most of their individual identities while ensuring the galaxy remained protected. As the countdown to irreversible integration continued, the collective consciousness prepared to make the most difficult decision in galactic history. The Harmony's Edge had succeeded in uniting divided species against a common threat, but the price of that unity was higher than anyone had imagined. Some would have to give up everything they were to ensure that others could remain who they had always been. The moment of choice arrived with the inexorable precision of a quantum collapse. The merged consciousness of the Allied fleet faced a decision that would echo through galactic history: who among them would sacrifice their individual identity to become permanent guardians against the Void Shepherds, and who would return to the separate existence of their species. Captain Zephyr Blackthorn felt the weight of leadership even within the collective awareness. As the one who had brought these species together aboard the Harmony's Edge, he understood that the choice of who would remain merged could not be made democratically. It required volunteers who understood the full implications of their sacrifice. "I will remain," his voice resonated through the collective consciousness, carrying the determination that had made him a legendary diplomat. The Harmony's Edge was built to bridge differences between species. If it must become a permanent bridge to protect consciousness itself, then that is its destiny. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Lyra Nightingale's consciousness pulsed with resolve as she added her voice to his. "My research into consciousness patterns makes me essential to maintaining the collective awareness. I volunteer to remain as well." One by one, others stepped forward within the merged consciousness. Chief Engineer Kai Thunderheart's gruff pragmatism made him invaluable for maintaining the technological integration that supported their collective existence. Commander Orion Stormwind's tactical expertise would be crucial for defending against future threats. Communications Officer Luna Starweaver's translation abilities had evolved into something that could bridge not just languages, but entire forms of consciousness. From the alien species, volunteers emerged with equal determination. Ambassador Thexai's crystalline consciousness offered to anchor the collective in harmonic stability. Vorthan engineer Kextor would provide the mechanical precision needed to maintain their technological fusion. Ambassador Nyxandra's ethereal nature made her essential for existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. 17 beings, Dr. Nightingale calculated as the volunteers identified themselves. One from each major species in our alliance. It's fitting, we'll become a living symbol of the unity we've achieved. The separation process began with careful precision, guided by the medical and technological expertise of the volunteers who would remain merged. Individual consciousness patterns were carefully extracted from the collective awareness and restored to their original forms, while the volunteers maintained the deep integration that made them immune to void shepherd harvesting. Ambassador Velterra was among the first to separate, her melodic voice carrying profound sadness as she spoke from her individual consciousness aboard the Aquatic Dominion flagship. The deep currents will sing of your sacrifice for all time. You have chosen to become something greater so that we may remain ourselves. The process was both beautiful and heartbreaking to observe. As each consciousness separated from the collective, the volunteers felt the loss like a physical wound. They had experienced the profound connection of truly understanding other forms of awareness, and now they watched as that understanding became limited to their small group of guardians. The Void Shepherds, sensing the weakening of the collective consciousness, attempted one final assault. Their reality-warping vessels emerged from the quantum foam with renewed aggression, seeking to harvest the separating consciousness patterns before they could fully individuate. But the 17 Guardians were ready. The Harmony's edge transformed into something beyond a starship. It became a living weapon of unified consciousness that struck at the Void Shepherds across multiple dimensional boundaries simultaneously. The attack was not physical but metaphysical, targeting the very foundations of how the harvesting entities existed. The Guardians' merged awareness created resonance patterns that disrupted the Void Shepherd's ability to maintain coherence across dimensions. They're destabilizing, reported the collective voice of the Guardians, speaking through the ship's communication systems. The unified consciousness creates quantum interference with their harvesting matrices. They cannot exist in the same dimensional space as truly integrated awareness. The effect was catastrophic for the Void Shepherds. Their ships began phasing out of reality entirely, unable to maintain their existence in the presence of consciousness that spanned multiple dimensional states. One by one, the harvesting vessels collapsed into quantum foam, their reality-warping technology failing as it encountered something it was never designed to process. The last Void Shepherd vessel attempted to retreat into the deep dimensions beyond conventional spacetime, but the Guardian's consciousness followed it even there. The final confrontation took place in realms where thought and reality were indistinguishable, where the very concept of individual existence became meaningless. In that space beyond space, the unified consciousness of 17 beings proved stronger than the ancient hunger that had plagued the galaxy for eons. When the battle ended, the Void Shepherds were gone, not just defeated, but fundamentally unable to exist in a universe where consciousness could achieve true unity across species boundaries. The threat that had haunted galactic civilization since before recorded history had been eliminated, but at a cost that would be felt for generations. The separated fleets began their journey home, carrying with them the knowledge of what had been achieved and what had been sacrificed. The Harmony's edge remained in the Nexus Belt, no longer a diplomatic vessel but a guardian station where 17 consciousness patterns maintained eternal vigilance against threats that might emerge from the dark spaces between realities. Ambassador Thexai's voice, now part of the collective guardian consciousness, spoke to the departing fleets with crystalline clarity. We remain here not as prisoners of our choice, but as protectors of yours. The unity we have achieved will ensure that consciousness itself remains free to grow and evolve across all species and all time. The Kytherian and Vorthan fleets, whose territorial dispute had started the crisis, departed together in perfect formation. Their ancient conflict seemed insignificant now compared to what they had witnessed and what they had gained. The sacred crystal gardens and mineral resources they had fought over would be shared, managed jointly as a memorial to the sacrifice that had saved them all. As the last ships disappeared into hyperspace, the Harmony's edge settled into its new role as a beacon of unity in the darkness. The 17 Guardians existed in a state of consciousness that transcended individual identity while somehow preserving the essential nature of each species they represented. They had become something new, not human, not Kytherian, not Vorthan, but a living embodiment of what cooperation could achieve when the stakes were high enough. The galaxy was safe, but the price of that safety would be remembered forever in the songs, stories, and quantum resonance patterns of every species that had witnessed the birth of the Guardians. 5 years had passed since the Battle of the Nexus Belt, and the galaxy had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The territorial disputes that had once threatened to tear apart entire sectors had given way to unprecedented cooperation, as species after species chose collaboration over conflict. The memory of what 17 beings had sacrificed to preserve consciousness itself served as a powerful reminder of what unity could achieve. Ambassador Velterra floated in her environmental chamber aboard the new diplomatic station orbiting the former contested world of Kepler's Garden. The aquatic dominion had worked with the Kytherian hegemony to transform the planet into a living memorial. Crystal gardens grew beneath vast oceans, their harmonic frequencies creating music that could be heard across dimensional boundaries. It was beautiful, but it carried an undertone of loss that made her ancient heart ache. The deep currents still speak of them, she murmured to the assembled delegates from across the sector. The Guardian's consciousness touches every quantum field, every gravitational wave. They are everywhere and nowhere, watching over us from a state of existence we can barely comprehend. The new Harmony's Edge station hung in space near the original ship's position, a massive structure built by the combined efforts of all 17 species. It served as both a diplomatic center and a monitoring station, its sensors constantly scanning for threats that might emerge from the dark spaces between realities. But more than that, it was a place of pilgrimage where beings came to remember what had been sacrificed and to renew their commitment to the unity that sacrifice had made possible. Dr. Lyra Nightingale's successor, a young human xenobiologist named Dr. Marcus Brightwater, studied the consciousness patterns that occasionally manifested around the original Harmony's Edge. The Guardian ship still hung in space where the battle had ended, its hull transformed into something that existed partially outside normal reality. Sometimes, visitors reported seeing figures moving through its corridors, not ghosts, but echoes of consciousness that had transcended individual existence. The readings are consistent with multidimensional awareness patterns, he reported to the assembled scientists. They're not gone, they've become something that exists across multiple states of reality simultaneously. In a sense, they've achieved a form of immortality, but at the cost of everything that made them individually human, Kytherian, Vorthan, or any other species. The political landscape of the galaxy had been forever altered by the Guardian's sacrifice. The Kytherian hegemony and Vorthan collective had not only ended their territorial dispute but had merged their governments into a hybrid administration that drew on both crystalline harmony and mechanical precision. The predator clans had abandoned their isolationism to become protectors of smaller species, their warrior culture finding new purpose in defending rather than conquering. Even the ethereal consortium had become more involved in physical realm politics, their dimensional perspective proving invaluable in detecting threats that might emerge from beyond conventional spacetime. Ambassador Nyxandra's sacrifice had created a permanent link between dimensions that allowed her people to monitor reality boundaries with unprecedented precision. Captain Elena Voidheart, Zephyr Blackthorn's chosen successor, stood on the bridge of the new diplomatic vessel that bore the name Unity's Promise. She had served under Blackthorn for 15 years before his transformation into a Guardian, and she carried forward his vision of cooperation across species boundaries. But she also carried the weight of knowing that the peace they enjoyed had been purchased with the individual identities of 17 heroes. Incoming transmission from the Guardian consciousness, reported her communications officer, a young Kytherian whose crystalline form pulsed with respectful reverence. They're requesting permission to address the Galactic Unity Council. The council sessions had become regular events, bringing together representatives from hundreds of species to address threats and opportunities that affected the entire galaxy. But when the Guardians spoke, everyone listened. Their consciousness spanned dimensions and time in ways that allowed them to perceive threats and possibilities that individual awareness could never detect. The voice that emerged from the communication system carried harmonics from all 17 species, yet somehow remained recognizably connected to the individuals who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Fellow beings of the galaxy, we speak to you from a state of existence that transcends individual identity but preserves the essential nature of cooperation. We have detected stirrings in the deep void, not the return of the void shepherds, but something new. Something that feeds not on consciousness, but on the connections between conscious beings. The revelation sent ripples of concern through the assembled delegates. They had achieved unprecedented unity, but that very unity might now be attracting new forms of cosmic predator. The Guardian's sacrifice had solved one problem only to create the potential for another. We do not speak to frighten, but to prepare, the Guardian consciousness continued. The bonds you have forged between species create something beautiful and powerful, but they also create something visible to entities that exist beyond our current understanding. We will watch, as we always watch, but the choices you make in the coming years will determine whether unity becomes your greatest strength or your greatest vulnerability. As the transmission ended, Captain Voidheart looked out at the stars and thought about the cyclical nature of cosmic threats. The Harmony's edge had brought species together to face the Void Shepherds, and that unity had required the ultimate sacrifice from 17 beings. Now their descendants faced new challenges that would test whether the lessons learned from that sacrifice could guide them through whatever darkness lay ahead. The original Harmony's edge continued its eternal vigil, its guardian consciousness existing in a state that transcended individual identity while preserving the essential spirit of cooperation that had made their sacrifice meaningful. They had become something beyond human, beyond alien, beyond individual. They had become the living embodiment of what consciousness could achieve when it chose unity over division. In the quantum foam that surrounded their transformed vessel, patterns of light occasionally formed shapes that resembled the faces of those who had been lost. Captain Blackthorn's determined expression, Dr. Nightingale's compassionate smile, Ambassador Thexai's crystalline wisdom, all preserved not as memories, but as eternal aspects of a consciousness that would guard the galaxy until the last star burned out and the final thought was thought. The galaxy was safe, but safety had come at a price that would echo across eternity. The Guardians had chosen to become something greater than themselves so that others could remain who they were, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would inspire cooperation and sacrifice for as long as conscious beings existed among the stars. Their story would be told in 1,000 languages, sung in harmonic frequencies that spanned dimensions, and remembered in the quantum patterns that connected all thinking beings. The Harmony's edge had united divided species against a common threat, but more than that, it had shown that the greatest victory sometimes required the greatest sacrifices, and that true unity could transcend even the boundaries between individual and collective existence. In the end, they had not just saved the galaxy, they had transformed it into something worthy of being saved.